I think we've all seen the video of the worker in a bucket truck getting ejected out of that bucket truck when someone hit the truck, and he's dangling there in his fall protection.
I think the biggest issue with any type of fall protection, especially when you're tying off into lifts, is just complacency. Because people have, they've been in a lift every day or they've done it hundreds of times and nothing's ever happened any other time. So they're not taking this serious.
Yeah, it's the phrase that everybody uses, the most dangerous phrase in business in general. Well, this is the way we've always done it.
For your own safety, you are reminded to stand behind the yellow line.
Welcome to Safety Factor. My name is Ben, and today with Safety Stand Down Week right around the corner, we wanted to get a panel of fall protection experts together to discuss the proper fall protection requirements for mobile elevated work platforms. Thank you all for joining. As we get started, do you mind just telling me a little bit about yourself and your background in the fall protection industry?
My name's Corey Crawford. I've been with Mazzella for a few months and been in the fall protection industry for several years and safety for about the past 15 years.
I'm Becky Danielson. I'm the training director at Safewaze Academy, and I have been teaching fall protection for 20 years now.
Hi, my name's Dan Montchal. I work for HySafe. I'm a project manager and horizontal lifeline specialist. I've been working in that industry for about a decade now.
I'm Hillary Frost. I'm the Fall Protection Division Manager for Mazzella. I have been in the industry for 6 years with Mazzella and the safety industry in total for well over 20.
All right, so what is a mobile elevated work platform?
A mobile elevated work platform, it's generally in the industry seen as a boom lift or a scissor lift, but it's any type of lift that's going to take you up in the air.
So when we started talking about this and I started researching it, I didn't realize how complicated this subject actually was. I figured that, OSHA 1910, 1926, you're 4 feet off the ground, you're 6 feet off the ground, you need fall protection. But as it turns out, it's a little bit more complicated once you get into a lift, right? So true or false, you don't need a fall protection system in a boom if you keep the gate closed.
False.
False.
And the reason for that is that a lot of people have the misconception that what your concern is that someone's going to climb and fall over the rail. The real concern in these platforms is ejection. And that typically happens from something coming in contact with that lift, the lift being moved while it's also raised where you go into a hole or some sort of indention. All of these issues can cause a catapult out, an ejection out of that boom lift versus somebody actually climbing up and over the rail. It's not a downward fall when you just fall over. It is out and down.
Do you always need to be wearing fall protection when you're in a mobile elevated work platform?
It goes back to the manufacturer of the lift, right? So, and it can also go to what site you're on and what they require. So you can't really just say you have to have this for this and you have to, or you don't have to have this. Because most of the manufacturers of scissor lifts state that if all the rails are closed, it lifts you up, you do your job, you don't have to be tied off. However, big GCs are requiring them to be tied off, and some of the manufacturers are starting to say that you need to be tied off in restraint or in fall arrest. And so it really goes back to, what does Genie say? What does JLG say? What do the manufacturers of the lift state? And what is whatever job site you're on, what do they require? What does your company require? Because if your company requires it, they're taking it up a notch. If in a scissor lift, JLG says you don't have to be tied off, I'm just using this as an example, but your company says you do, and then they clearly state how and what you need to use, then you have to follow your company because they're taking it a step above what the manufacturer even says.
So if OSHA says one thing, a lot of people just they default to what OSHA says. So if OSHA says that a scissor lift is technically a scaffold, they say, well, I don't need fall protection. But then there's manufacturer recommendations, and then there's your own work recommendations. So how does the hierarchy work there on what trumps what?
So the bare minimum for compliance is OSHA. Anything that goes above that, whether it's a general contractor or your company, if it's meeting that requirement and above, then you follow that requirement that's higher.
That's why JSAs are so important as well, where they're completed in for every job site and every task that you have. I don't think I've ever seen a scissor lift or a boom lift that doesn't have an engineered anchor point in it. So there's always the opportunity to be tied off when you are on a mobile elevated working platform.
Before, Hillary, you mentioned that ejection is something that you need to be concerned about with boom lifts. What's the difference between a boom lift and a scissor lift and the requirements for those two systems?
So a scissor lift is just going to go up and down. It's not going to go out at any type of angle, especially when you're looking at boom lifts. The thing that you want to pay attention to is the tipping point. And so scissor lifts, because it's just going up and down vertically, to most of the manufacturers, you don't need to be tied off to, just because it's considering that the guardrail that's keeping you enclosed. Where when you're on a boom lift, you do need to be tied off, because most times what it can do, it'll take you out past the tipping point, and it's more of a fall hazard that you could be ejected from it.
So when do you need fall protection in a scissor lift?
When it's required by your company or the manufacturer or the general contractor or whatever site you're at.
And when do you need fall protection in a boom lift?
Every time you get into it and move it. Scissor lifts are up and down, and an aerial lift is an articulating boom for all intents and purposes. So basically, your boom, and when you move it, you lower and then you drive. If you hit a giant pothole, railroad tracks, there's videos out there that you can find where people hit railroad tracks and fly out and over and hit the ground. So whenever you're in a boom lift, in order to move, you have to lower, so you don't have the clearance you need for certain pieces of equipment. So you're moving, and that boom is out there and it's bouncing around, and then you raise it once you get to that spot. So there's a big difference between a scissor lift and an articulating boom.
I think we've all seen the video of the worker in a bucket truck getting ejected out of that bucket truck when someone hit the truck, and he's dangling there in his fall protection. In that case, that was a more dangerous situation because the bucket actually caught fire. So he's dangling there on fire, and it ended up cutting his fall protection, but ultimately it saved his life versus him being completely ejected into the fire that already had started on the truck as well.
Yeah, so what are some things that people don't understand about utilizing fall protection in a lift, regardless of the type, whether it's a scissor lift or a boom lift?
So best practice, and I'll explain this in a second, but best practice is no matter what you're in, whether it's a scissor lift or an aerial lift, you should be in restraint, because of the fact that when you are in a scissor lift, if you are able to make it out and over an edge, there are certain lifts that if you have it fully extended and you fall because you're doing something stupid, which we know happens every single day, standing on the mid-rail, putting a piece of plywood on the mid-rail to create another level up. The whole point of a scissor lift is you stay in it, it lifts you up, you do what you need to do, and you come down. So restraint is best practice all the way around. And going back to articulating booms, you have to lower to move. So being in restraint, that's key. But when you get to height, you can be in fall arrest because you have the clearance. So again, you have to look at the clearance that you have within all of this. And so in scissor lifts, if you're required to tie off, restraint is your best option. And when you're moving in a boom lift or an articulating boom, restraint is your best option. And the reason that I say that so strongly is that the fatalities that have happened in the last 3 years, when they have been recreated, had a person been in restraint, they would not have died. It's not a requirement, but it's a best practice.
And typically those anchors in a boom lift are rated for fall, or they're rated for restraint. They're not rated for arrest. So you have to take that factor in as well. They've been engineered to keep you from going out versus allowing you to go out and catching you. And then you start moving into like, well, what should I be using? Should I be using a shock absorbing lanyard? Should I be using a fixed length lanyard? Should I be using an SRL that's only, 6 feet long that will keep me in the basket? Well, the problem that you run into when you start to move into shock absorbing lanyards is they have that additional shock pack, which allows additional free fall. So you have to make sure you're using the right equipment for the job that you're doing. And once again, anytime you're at elevation, regardless of whether it's required or not by, the manufacturer, why would you not tie off? At what point would you ever be in a situation where you're 10 feet in the air and you're saying, I don't really need to be tied off? I mean, right? Anybody in their right mind doesn't think like that. So that's why we have to continuously educate people that when you're working at height, you have to be tied off. It's a loss of life. It's an injury. And, Ben and I have had multiple conversations about the cost of doing nothing and what that does to your business and what it does to your safety culture and what it does to your reputation as a company.
Corey, can you explain a little bit about what is the difference between fall arrest and fall restraint for those who don't know?
Sure. So the fall restraint is going to keep you from falling, right? It's the guardrails that are set up for you. It's the things that are to prevent you from falling. It's more fall prevention, right? It's to keep you from going over, from all hitting the ground. Fall arrest is once you do sustain that fall, it's to stop you from hitting the ground. It's to stop you from going all the way down. A lot of the times you'll see, fall arrest is more like the SRLs, the SRDs, lanyards, things like that. And restraint can be more like a positioning lanyards, things like that. Something that's shorter, that's more designed to keep you in one spot.
Yeah, so I like to look at like a positioning lanyard as kind of like a dog leash, basically. You can only go so far and you can't actually get over the edge, right?
You shouldn't be able to, correct.
So Mazzella requires, whether you're in a scissor lift or a boom lift, you have to be wearing fall protection, right? Why is that?
It's because our number one core value is safety, right? And you need to be safe no matter what you're doing. And working at height, whether you're in a boom lift or a scissor lift, the problem is you start giving people too many rules. So when you're in a boom lift, you do this. And when you're in a scissor lift, you do this. It becomes convoluted. They don't remember that they have to do this here and this here. So for Mazzella, it's a standard across the board. If you are working at height, you are tied off, especially in the elevated platforms.
A lot of the people working at height in Mazzella, they're our crane technicians, so they're working in some relatively dangerous places, right? So what are the reasons why, if they're in a scissor lift also, that they're required to be wearing fall protection?
Yeah, so we've actually recently had a couple incidences where a crane or an operator for a forklift or something else, not with our company, but with our customers who have come in contact with those lifts while our people are in them and working at height. And once again, you risk ejection at that point.
So let's talk a little bit about how you tie off in a lift. So true or false, tying off to the rail is fine.
False.
False.
Why?
False unless it's designed to do so.
True.
Because some manufacturers are designing them. But overall, no.
Why usually is that something you don't want to do?
You can't do that because it's not designed as the anchor point or to absorb all the energy if you were to fall or be pulled. So if you are tying off, it's the same thing with guardrail that's on a building. That's never going to be able to support you because it's not tested in any type of capacity for arrest or restraint.
So where do you want to tie off if you were in a lift?
The engineered
anchor point.
So how do you know what that is or where that is?
So typically it's going to be at your feet towards the back of the basket. So if you're facing outward in the basket, that anchor point's going to be down below you and behind you.
So what are some common tie-off mistakes that you usually see out in the field?
I see a lot of people choking off their lanyard or their SRL because they don't have a better tie-off spot. I see that often.
What does that mean, choking off your lanyard?
So basically it means it's tying back your snap hook or your pelican hook, whatever, tying it back onto your webbing of your SRL, back onto itself.
So Becky, you laughed. Why is that such a bad idea?
Oh,
I think she cried, actually.
Such a bad idea. It's such a bad idea. Unless they're designed to do so. But again, you're tying it back around something that isn't as designed for it usually. But we see a lot of that, or just not tying off at all, just wearing a harness and not tying off at all.
That's very useful. It's helpful. You got the harness on.
We see it a lot.
It's so crazy. I'm wearing a harness. Like, no one will notice I'm not tied off. And you see it all the time.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue in any type of fall protection, especially when you're tying off into lifts, is just complacency. Because people have, they've been in a lift every day or they've done it hundreds of times and nothing's ever happened any other time. So they're not taking it as serious. So either they're A, not tying off at all, or they are just hooking it to the rail because they think, what's the worst that could happen? And when you get complacent in fall protection, that's generally when a mistake's going to happen, not when you're the most vigilant about it.
Yeah, it's the phrase that everybody uses, the most dangerous phrase in business in general. Well, this is the way we've always done it.
And then if you do it every day, eventually the danger kind of escapes from what you would normally feel. Sometimes you have to remind yourself how dangerous what you're doing actually is. So why don't people tie off?
A lot of times the reason that we get that people don't want to tie off is because it, depending on what they're using, it either gets in their way, it slows them down, it in some form or fashion prevents them from doing the job as quickly as they feel like it needs to be done.
So we talked about where you tie off to, the engineered anchor point. So true or false, the shock lanyard is safer because it absorbs energy. So you should be wearing that in a mobile elevated work platform.
Well,
safer than what? Than not tying off?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess you're right, Corey. It's safer than not tying off at all, yeah.
So better than nothing, but not the best thing you should be using. So why is it not the best?
In my experience, what we've noticed, talking about earlier, that the boom lifts turn into catapults ultimately. What we've seen a lot of times is people that are using shock lanyards, because you have to fall the entire 6 foot distance plus the 6 foot person height. So you're talking about somewhere around an 18-foot fall, right? The average height at rest on a boom lift or a scissor lift is just under 4 feet. So typically you're probably going to not have the risk of a head impact, but you're going to still probably hit the ground or possibly hit the ground. But when you use an SRD, it's generally going to stop you much sooner, much faster, and also give you the chance of self-rescue.
So it can be a little bit complicated then, I guess, to figure out what the best PPE is that you should be wearing if you're working in a mobile elevated work platform. So what are some tips for selecting proper PPE to be utilized?
You go to Safewaze website. They have an entire product line for MEWP SRLs. I mean, that's. There's also the ability they have quite a lot of research out there for using even a class 1 SRL in these platforms. Even though you're tying off at your feet, they've written an entire tech sheet document that tells you why it's okay to utilize that SRL in that lift. So there's a ton of resources out there, but I would say that Safewaze is probably the easiest one to find and gives you the most detail.
So Becky, what makes a SRL special for use in a mobile elevated work platform?
If you think about an SRL, it works the same way the seatbelt in your car works, right? It's based on speed and inertia. So once you hit that speed and that inertia, it locks off. So if your body moves fast, like a quick jerk, it will lock off. So now think about that catapult effect, that articulating boom that's moving. Now all of a sudden you move fast enough, the likelihood that you're actually going to make it out of the bucket is not likely. That's not to say that you might not do some chin music on the rails down, but you're not going to get catapulted out of there. So because it's based on speed and inertia and that lock off, if you were to hit something or something were to hit you, your body movement is going to lock that really fast and not allow you to launch yourself out and over a railing. Now, that's not to say that if you don't step on the mid rail and do something you're not supposed to do, that you wouldn't fall over that edge.
Class 1 or class 2 SRL, which should you be looking for?
Best practice would be to choose a class 2. I mean, ultimately, restraint is your first option, but using a class 2 SRL just in the event that someone does something that they're really not supposed to do by not thinking. A lot of times people just do and they don't really think about, but I just got to reach this, and they just step up on a bucket, which is common, or something in the lift, and now something hits them, a forklift hits them or whatever. Now they could be catapulted out because they stepped up a little bit higher. And so class 2 will prevent them from being injured.
But if they have a restraint on, hopefully that'll actually even keep them from stepping up on that bucket because they cannot get to the point where they're going to be launched out.
Correct. Restraint will hinder their movement in the lift. Restraints typically, when you're in movement, is what's best practice. Reality is, if you're in restraint, you really can't move a whole lot in the lift. So restraint while moving, and then when you get to where you're doing your work, having that SRL, so that in the event that something hits you, you don't get catapulted out.
Do you have any suggestions for the type of restraint that people might want to use?
It can vary. Some people, if they have side D-rings, they'll use, we just had this conversation with Sunbelt. They're using an adjustable rope, and then they go to the side D-ring. So they just leave it in the lift. And so when they're moving, they just hook it up to their side D-rings, and they have their fall arrest on, but they just have the work positioning. And then as they move, they're in restraint, and then they can just drop that, unhook it from their side D-rings and then do what they need to do. And then when they move it again, they just hook those back up again. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And again, this is a fairly new conversation that's starting to happen based on the fatalities and the recreation of the events.
So that's an interesting point that you bring up. So fall restraint is great during motion, and then fall arrest, it might be something that you want to use when you're actually doing the job. Why is that?
You need the movement. You need to be able to move around. You think of some of these lifts they're crazy wide, and you need to be able to move around in that lift to do your job. If you're in restraint, you can't really move anywhere. So you kind of need to be able to move around in the lift, because the lift is allowing you to get to where you need to do your work.
I think maybe we should cover kind of what needs to be done from an inspection standpoint before you actually get into that lift. So, you need to do the inspection of your equipment, the inspection of the actual lift, ensuring that the gate locks, that the rails are in good working condition. There's no issue with the anchor point where it's corroded, there's pitting, it's possibly bent. We need to ensure that people understand that the inspection process is always pre-use, regardless of what working environment you're in, regardless of the task that you're doing. Fall protection is great to have on, but if you haven't inspected it and there's something wrong and there's a malfunction with the equipment, or the equipment is old and it has fraying, bird caging, whatever the possibility is, you're not doing yourself any favors wearing the fall protection, right? You have that false sense of security that you're secure, and in which case you're actually wearing faulty equipment, which can increase your likelihood of injury.
So that's a great point, Hillary. Are there any other best practices that you should be doing before and during working in a mobile elevated work platform?
The best practice is that you are trained to utilize that piece of equipment. A lot of people just jump into lifts and they're like, yeah, I'm going, we're good to go. They have absolutely no training on the back end of it. And that increases your risk of injury or death as well. One of the big things that you need to ensure that you do when you get into these lifts is that you've also surveyed the area that you're going to be working, and you're ensuring that the elevation doesn't have large shifts in it. So where you have maybe a big pothole in the road, or there's something that you could possibly come in contact with. When you are up and articulated out like that, you can't see. You only see what's below you. You can't see what's behind you and what's actually where those tires are. So there's a lot about, again, it goes back to your JSA that needs to be completed before you start working.
So there's actually two trainings that you need, right? You need fall protection training, and then you also need to be trained on the operation of the lift, right?
I know somebody who can do that. Her name's Becky.
The fall protection stuff, not
fall
the lift.
protection, not the lift portion.
Yeah, so just because you're trained to work at height doesn't necessarily mean you're trained to operate a lift.
Correct.
And then also just because you are trained to operate a lift does not mean that you're trained to work at height. Are you allowed to use the lift to get on and off other elevated platforms?
You can definitely do that. It's designed to be able to do something like that, but you have to do it safely. You need to have a tie-off point on the platform that you're getting onto, so you can tie off on that to become safe, and then remove your tie off from the lift. You just want to make sure you can do it safely in a safe environment.
And make sure that the manufacturer is okay with it, because there are some manufacturers that are not okay with certain lifts being utilized in that application.
What are your guys' experience with people actually utilizing fall protection when they're in lifts? Is this a common thing, or are you seeing that more people don't use it or think that it's a hindrance to their job?
Not just in lifts, but overall, fall protection has come a long way over the past few years. And a lot of it just comes back to the education. It's because people don't know about it. And what Hillary said earlier is one of the most dangerous things is this is how we've always done it. And so when you have people that have been doing it for years a certain way, or some companies who won't have safety specialists on staff to educate people, I think that's where it becomes the most dangerous because they're not aware. So awareness is always going to be step one in moving forward in the right direction.
Yeah. And then, jump off from what Dan was saying too, is safety has consistently been a reactive portion of most people's businesses, right? We don't know we need fall protection until something bad happens. We don't know we need fire watch till something bad happens. And that's just the common theme across safety in general, is that it's very reactive based on something that's already happened. I think with what we have going on, especially with the representation that we have on this podcast, is that every person on here believes that education is the first place that you start. So none of us walk into a customer or spend time with a customer and are berating them in any way on what they're doing or not doing right. Or what we're doing when we walk in there is educating these people to understand that these are the things that we want or that you should be doing to keep your workers safe at height or when they're doing whatever task they're doing. And one of the first things in the first part about having that safety factor is the education portion and the training. OSHA mandates if you're working at height, you must have fall protection training. But we want to take the OSHA mandate out of it, right? And try to change the conversation to where you want your people to go home the same way that they came in every day or better. We definitely don't want them going out worse.
So next week is Safety Stand Down Week. People might be listening to this podcast or watching this podcast and preparing for that. If there's one thing that you wish they would take away from this podcast, what would you want them to take away?
Take the time to understand the equipment that you're using, what it's capable, what it's not capable of, understanding what the manufacturers say that you can do with it or not. Take the time, step back, figure out what you've got, figure out your clearance calculations, use the right tool for the job.
And if you're not sure, wear fall protection.
I think also going that if you're not sure, make sure that you're asking the questions. So if you're unfamiliar with what the standards are on this job site with the manufacturer, make sure you have clarity on what the job you're doing is and all the fall protection needed. That way you're not going in and guessing what to do. It's stated out clearly how you should be completing your job and what fall protection is required.
Yeah, truly. When it comes to Safety Stand Down Week, it's no job is too simple to wear your fall protection. No job is too fast. No job is too small. Wear it all the time because those small jobs are what usually ends up in disaster if you don't wear it.
Well, thank you all for joining. Becky, Dan, how can people learn a bit more about you and your companies?
Well, you can visit our website at safewaze.com. There's product on side of it, and then there's the education side. So Safewaze Academy has its own link on our website as well.
What is Safewaze Academy?
It's fall protection education. So we teach multitude of courses. We teach them both on site and at our headquarters in Concord, North Carolina. And I get to be the instructor for all of it.
And you can find out more about HySafe at HySafe.com. Somewhat connected with Safewaze and Becky, as we're all under Canopy brands, so we're just a sister company of theirs. And one of the things that I'll just say to plug in that HySafe has going on right now that's really cool is we have a 360 mobile mapping procedure now. So you can set cameras up in any factory facility you have, and it will map it out digitally 360 degrees and help come up with the right fall protection needs for your warehouse.
All right. Thank you, Becky and Dan. You can track Hillary and Corey down at MazzellaCompanies.com. They can help you with all your fall protection needs. Don't forget to pop into our Learning Center, where we have a ton of videos, articles, and free downloads to support your fall protection program. Subscribe to Safety Factor wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can watch it on the Lifting and Rigging channel on YouTube. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.